Welcome. It's so great to be here. I'm the inaugural show of what we call Grace Under Pressure. It's a show that poses questions to thought leaders and doers whose ideas and actions are helping us come to a greater understanding of ourselves and the opportunities in front of us. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, the commitment we feel toward others. Grace for me is a generosity we show, respect we give, compassion we demonstrate. Now, doing it as a leader, especially now in challenging times, requires the ability to act for others and energize everyone around us. So I couldn't ask for a better inaugural guest than my dear friend and colleague, Alaina Love. Welcome, Alaina.
Thank you, John. It's so great to be here, and congratulations on your show.
Oh, well, thank you. Anyway, so wonderful to be here. Let me tell the audience a little bit about you. You are the CEO of Purpose Link Consulting, and you're nationally recognized, of course, for purpose and passion. You're the author of the best-selling McGraw-Hill book, The Purpose Linked Organization, How Passionate Leaders Inspire Winning Teams and Great Results. But unlike so many other people in our field, you actually have a science background. You started in medical school, and then you transitioned into pharma. So your first career was in pharmaceutical as a scientist. So you have a real rigor for science and discipline, which is a fundamental, I think, to your work. You don't just wing it, you do research. And so then, for some odd reason, we'll explore, you got out of science and went into HR, people stuff. You know, it's so much easier with science, but regardless, that's your choice. Then you became an executive director of HR for Merck, where you were responsible for services for more than 15,000 people around the world. And you transitioned to the private sector, or not the private sector, you're running your own business, which you've done for nearly 20 years. And you've conducted your research, and you have a wonderful tool that we will talk about called the Passion Profiler. But welcome.
Thank you.
And we've had such good conversations over the years because I still consider you as my go-to person with deep HR issues. What's HR doing about these kinds of things? Not the nitty-gritty, but the things. And what better time now than to talk about the issue? What are you hearing from your clients? You're a coach and a consultant. What are they telling you about the challenges they're facing?
Well, I mean, I think the challenges that I'm hearing about are huge and deep and broad, and they're what I call the perfect storm. I mean, we're in a situation right now where leaders aren't just challenged with the normal stuff. You know, how do we meet our quarterly goals? What are we going to do with this new product release? What are we going to do about this service that we want to offer? But they're trying to do all of that within the context of two viruses. One's called COVID, the other one's called racism. And those two have come together and converged on leaders now, putting more pressure on them and on the business and on their capacity to lead than ever before, I believe.
Great. So let's take the COVID first. So what are you hearing about reopening or our new workplace? What's that going to be like? And then we'll discuss the racism.
Well, I think that most of the clients that I talk to are really still trying to figure out that question. Depending upon what state they're located in or pieces of their business are located in, it may be a different formula for different parts of their business. And because there's so much still that we don't know about this virus and how we're going to see it more for transition come the fall, I think most of the leaders are trying to be very, very cautious about how they reopen, and more importantly, feeling a real sense of responsibility for their people. Am I going to bring people back into a space and expose them somehow? And do we have enough social distancing and other regulations in place in the way in which we operate that allow us to have people work together safely? So I think that that's, a big piece of what they're trying to sort through. And then I think this whole thing, because we had such a long period of lockdown, so to speak, this whole thing makes them now start to really question, do we really need all of these people in this building, or can we start to work differently? Are we going to morph in some way the way we actually do the business of doing business? And they're finding that, people were actually pretty productive. They got stuff done. We managed to connect with each other. So maybe we will have more flexibility in the way in which we allow folks to work. In fact, one person I know who works as a programmer, who's actually the son of a friend of mine, told me his company allowed them to make a choice. Did they want to keep office space or not? If they didn't, they could just work from home permanently. And that's what he chose. He chose to work from home permanently. So things are shifting.
You and I have talked about this before. I think we're going to get something, the new normal will be a hybrid workplace where some people are in an office and some people are work from home, not in the office. And I think this is going to be a great question for aspiring PhD candidates in organizational behavior. But that's going to take years of research. But we can't put those questions off. So what do you think this is going to happen with a bifurcated workplace? What do you think the culture is going to be like?
That's a really interesting question. I think a huge shift in the cultures that organizations are experiencing right now. I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on leaders to really work at establishing and maintaining their culture, because when people aren't together physically every day, it's easy to forget they're around. Right? I mean, I even see this with some leaders that I've worked with where, one office is on the East Coast and the other office is out in Los Angeles, and them having trouble just having people from one coast to the other talk to each other and include each other in decision making and so forth. Imagine now that all the folks that were in the office together and used to see each other every day aren't having that sort of natural bump into you in the hallway kind of encounter. So you have to spend more time really trying to do things to keep the culture intact and to support the behaviors that you expect to see in your culture going forward. So they're going to be a huge use of technology to make that happen. There's going to have to be some rigor around when and how often we meet. They're going to have to structure ways for people to have more casual encounters with one another, because they won't have sort of the natural, colliding in the hallway opportunity for that to happen anymore. So it's going to test us.
And I think what's your perception? What's going to happen to opportunities for women in management with a bifurcated culture? My sense, and it's pure speculation, that more women will opt to work from home than not. I may be totally wrong. Do you have a feeling about that?
I think that women making that decision will depend not just on their personal situation, but it will depend on their perception of what is required for success in their organization. And if their perception is, I've got to be there and be seen, and all the guys are going to the office, if I'm staying at home, I'm going to be forgotten in this equation. So they're going to make decisions using, some of that logic as well. I also think that the challenges for women have already been well documented. I mean, when women come into the workforce at the entry level, if you look at how many of them actually progress to the C-suite, it's something like, single digit percentages. And if you're talking about women of color, it's like 3% actually make it to the C-suite. So we already know that the hurdle and the mountain that they climb is pretty high. Now, if working from home means working from home and I'm in a situation where I'm not also trying to homeschool my children while I'm doing my job, that's one thing. But there's been a disproportionate burden on women during this COVID period, because not only have they been at home, but because they're at home, they're expected by their families to be, full in 100% because mom's here, right? Do everything that you normally would when you're home. And at the same time, they're trying to deliver 100% of themselves to their jobs with, the challenges of technology and time zones and all of that they're having to deal with. So I don't think it's an easy road forward for women. I think that this whole situation is creating more challenges for us.
Now let's get to the other virus, which is stress, and sadly has been with us since our inception, before the inception of our nation, and that's racism. So what's your perception? How are executives dealing with this or not dealing with it?
Well, I've seen both sides. I've seen some organizations being led by individuals who feel very strongly that taking a very direct, unambiguous position on this is important for their organizations. And so those individuals have worked to have their companies put out particular statements about their belief system, about what they will tolerate and not tolerate, about the things that they're committing to do in their organizations around inclusion and diversity. Some of them have written some pretty big checks to different organizations to support their work, and came out with those statements, took those actions very, very early in the process. I mean, we're just last week, we were just 1 month experiencing the 1 month anniversary of the death of George Floyd. But you saw people in very proactive organizations who immediately after that happened were, putting out statements and taking a stand. Others, not so much. Others pulled back. I'm not so sure what we should do about this. Let's see if this blows over. And for those folks, when you get down into the grassroots of their organization and talk to their people will tell you the silence was deafening.
Right. And we had talked about this before, that some executives who felt uncomfortable with the issue would kind of, the word was, let's bundle this social justice issue with as just another diversity issue, whether it relates to minorities in general, or women equity, or what other groups. So what's the case against bundling? It's just same old, same old. What's the pushback on that?
Well, I think the pushback on that is that, bundling it is like sweeping it under the rug. It's like one more thing that we're really not going to do anything about. And it's part of what's contributed to the problem being what it is now. That's the reaction. And I also think that it's not really possible to bundle it, because this came right on the heels of COVID. I mean, I shouldn't say right on the heels. It's always been happening. It was here before COVID, right? But it was raised to a level of a microscope, being shone on it because of George Floyd's murder. Right. And so if the people in the organization and the people who are your clients, your customers, see you coming out with a strong response to COVID, but then just willowing under the pressure of this issue of racism and not really doing anything about that, making any statements, taking any kind of strong stand, it sends a message about what's important to you and what you believe in, and the courage that you're willing to show or not show around particular issues. So trying to then bundle it, it's like double talk. Let me tell you what I want you to believe. I laugh all the time. I have a friend who has a brother, and he got caught out at a bar when he was in his early 20s, and he got caught by the girl he was dating flirting with another girl who was at the bar, and he told her, he went up, when he realized his girlfriend was there, he knew he was in trouble, and he said, "Let me tell you what you think you saw." And that's kind of like what the bundling thing does. It's like, let me tell you why, this should be bundled together, and this is not a specific issue we should really address.
Well, in a way, yes, exactly. And I loved your example, because it's yet again, the people in power, quote, explaining to the people without power, let me tell you what it is. And that's actually insulting.
Oh, yeah.
To say at least. So you have said something, you had a conversation, and you used the word seeding as a solution. Tell me about that.
Well, I think of when we try to solve this issue, especially inside organizations, when we're looking at this notion of inclusion and diversity, and we're asking some tough questions about, how are we doing? What should we be doing? What do our numbers look like? And do we actually have folks that we can point to who have successfully navigated the ladder within our organization and have reached top levels? So that's one piece. Any organization looks at, what's actually happening. What do our numbers look like? The other thing that organizations look at is, well, what are we doing internally to create an environment where people can really be successful here? And where we're focusing on specific groups to make sure that they have the resources and the development, the mentoring and the sponsorship necessary to advance in our organization. On the far end of the beginning end of that is, what are we doing about intake? Are we bringing individuals into the organization Are we creating slates of candidates that are diverse so that there's a possibility that we can get people into the organization of a variety of different backgrounds and races and ethnicities? So that's important. Intake, what are we doing internally to help with upward mobility and development? And then how are we managing in the organization to create an inclusive culture? But before all of that happens, before anybody can come into the pipeline, there have to be people externally in the environment from which you're recruiting. So my concept is really, how are we seeding talent out in the general population that allows us to then bring folks in to organizations? And I believe organizations have a responsibility not only to sort of cull the flowers from the garden, so to speak, but also to plant the seeds that let them grow. So what are you doing in your communities? What are you doing in your school systems? What are you doing with external organizations that are devoted to raising great talent in different disciplines, et cetera? So that's the thinking behind the seeding concept.
I love that idea because it gets to the heart of it's pre-recruitment, if you will. And I love the term seeding is wonderful. So what can an organization do when you say partner with external organizations? What kinds of organizations might those be?
Oh, it depends on the field that you're in. There's a lot of interest in, for example, in the STEM field to grow talent in the STEM field. There's a organization called Black Girls Who Code. Are you supporting those kinds of organizations? Are you supporting HBCUs? Are you actually sending your own people out into the school systems in your local communities and working with students there and helping them understand, here's the career path that's available to you? Are you beginning specific targeted internship programs for people of color to come into your organization and experience what it's like to work there, learn some skills, take those back and come back again for another year, rather than waiting until they're juniors or rising seniors, and then that's their first opportunity to get exposed to your organization? And then what are you doing once they're in that internship program to really help them feel like this really could be a place that I live? Could be a place that I could create a wonderful career and make great contributions.
And I think that's an interesting issue because you have talked about this, that what white people might think, well, this is a wonderful working environment, and I feel really comfortable here. People are like me, and hey, we all get along. That's not true for people in minorities, regardless. And so, what can leaders do to be attuned to that difference, so they can make it less of a different or less of a separation, shall we say?
Oh boy, that is a important question, John. And I had a recent experience with that because I think that the answer first begins in listening, not assuming that you understand the experience that every other individual is having and assuming that it's the same as yours. And I think this most recent situation that we've experienced here, not just with George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor and others, everybody that we've seen, and this litany of people come past over the last couple of years, where we've seen some, awful things because we have this wonderful thing called the cell phone camera, and we can record stuff that's going on, has really created an environment where if leaders aren't pausing and doing the work to really listen to what's going on in the organization and where people are and what they're feeling, they're going to miss the opportunity to really make a difference with it. And that's, I think that's the biggest shift that I've seen happen.
From my perspective, I would say it takes grace. And grace is that ability to reach out, to seek a kinship with others different from ourselves. So let's shift to the passion profiler. And what relevance does it have for our period of uncertainty right now that so many leaders are feeling?
Well, I think the most important thing that's required of anyone who is in a leadership position, anyone, and everyone is, by the way, in a leadership position of some sort, is to understand yourself. And this particular tool, the Passion Profiler, helps you to understand the deep underlying passions that you carry that ultimately emanate from the deeper purpose that you're here to accomplish. That's the contextual framework for this particular tool. And what I've done through my research is codify this notion of passion into 10 distinct, what we call passion archetypes. And all of us have all 10 of those passions within us to greater or lesser degrees.
But I think I only have 4. So.
No, you have all 10. But what's important to understand is what your top 3 passions are, because those are the passions that really drive your behaviors. They drive the areas that you're likely to find fulfillment in. They help you to understand the strengths that you're likely to enjoy and the vulnerabilities that you might be more subject to because of those passions.
And I'm glad you touched on vulnerability, because somehow that's sort of become a buzzword of you and I have talked about it for a long time. And the other, and vulnerability is, tell me why it's important for leaders to be vulnerable at this particular time of crisis.
Because being vulnerable shows everyone that you're human, that you don't have all the answers. And if you think you do, you are sadly mistaken and likely not to find them, because you already think you know them. And when we use this notion of vulnerability, when we talk about the passions, we use it as a way of helping people to understand that these are not necessarily, vulnerability and weakness don't necessarily equate. There's not an equal sign between those two words. So for us, vulnerability really means these are the areas in which you might enter and need to take more caution, because these situations may cause you to show up in a way that you're not so happy with, or to stumble into behaviors that you would rather not exhibit. And certainly they don't play to the best of you. So when we use that, we think of vulnerabilities as equivalent to a yellow flashing warning light at an intersection, which doesn't mean, although I see a lot of people do it, it doesn't mean speed up. It means slow down, take a look, be sure that before you cross through that intersection, it's safe to do so.
Well, it's a degree of heightened self-awareness. But why and there's research that shows this, and you know better than I, why are leaders deficient in self-awareness? What's your take on that?
You know, there's a lot of things that support that, right? I mean, what we see is that people rise in an organization. They're surrounded by all of the accoutrement of success, right? I've got my requisite, in the old days, requisite corner office, my parking space with my name on it. I've got all of these people who are at my disposal to support my success. And it can be pretty heady, right? It can be pretty heady. And if you are continuing to do things inside an organization, and the result is that the organization continues to give you recognition for those behaviors, then there's no reason that you can think of that you should change or do anything differently. When you are somebody who is a self-aware leader, you recognize that your decisions, your actions, every word you utter, every bat of your eyelashes is being watched by other people. And so you understand the responsibility that you have to show up in a way that supports not only your own success, but supports the success of the entire organization. And if that doesn't make you pause for a minute and think, who am I and how am I showing up? Then you're really, really, living in a pretty tone deaf space.
Right.
So
one of the things a phrase I always use a lot is making a positive difference in the lives of others. So from a leadership standpoint, just what we've talked about, what does that mean? Recognizing one's frailties and resolving to make a change? Or what would you say?
What does making a difference in the lives of others mean?
Positive difference.
First of all, it means owning that as a responsibility that you have, first and foremost. If you think that creating a positive difference for others is somebody else's job and not yours, then you're probably never going to make a lot of progress on that. And it's a huge missed opportunity. So I think it means understanding self, like how am I showing up? And is that contributing to the betterment of others? And number 2, have I taken the time to really understand where other people are and what they're experiencing, so that if it's within my power to change or shape that in some way that makes it more positive, I actually take the steps to do that. And it's understanding that leadership is service. At the end of the day, it's really not about you. It's about how you are here to serve. And if you don't want to serve, then don't pursue a leadership position, because that's really what it's about. You are beholden to the people that you represent. It's not the other way around.
That's such an important point. And you and I are in the school, as we say, of servant leadership. And so often now, I mean, I know the truly good leaders are those that do it. But what's an aspiring person who's learning, getting around this? What is an example of service that you like to, a role model that you would say?
A person, or I don't know that I would choose a particular person to answer that question as much as I would choose a mindset to answer that question. I think that individuals who are coming up and in their careers and want to aspire to higher and higher leadership positions are people who would benefit from deeply examining themselves in all aspects of their life. Who am I, not just at work, but who am I in my personal relationships? And am I showing up in a way, number one, that is authentic? This is me. I don't have to put a costume on when I come in to do anything that I do at work. And who are constantly looking at themselves and asking, what are the things that I can celebrate about who I am? And what are the things I really will commit to working on improving? And when I say commit to working on it, I mean, let other people hold you accountable to improving in those areas. Tell other people, these are the things that I'm working on, and contract with them to kind of let you know if you venture too far off in the wrong direction around those things you say are important to you to improve on.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And I know that the passion profiler examines that or reinforces that, because when we think of assessments that executive coaches use, I think sometimes our clients feel, well, they're just going to look at my bad things or the things I'm weak in. What I love about your instrument, it talks about my positives. What are my strengths? And all instruments do that, but there's just a pejorative about sometimes, oh, I'm being assessed, and they're going to find out all my shortcomings. But no, it's that balance between the two, and that's why I like your profiler, because it's affirmative, but also, hey, let's work on this. So,
the instrument is really designed to help you celebrate the very best that you can be. We examine you against 10 archetypes. They're creator, conceiver, discoverer, processor, teacher, connector, altruist, healer, transformer, and builder. As I said, all of us have all 10 in us. If we are examining you relative to these particular passions, there's no one passion that's better than the other. They're all equally wonderful. So when you get your results back, you don't look at them from the perspective of, oh my gosh, I scored low in creator. I got to go fix that. I got to go decide to be a creator tomorrow. I always tell people, changing your passions is like trying to change your eye color. You're born with the eye color. You can stick contact lenses over them, but you're born with your eye color and you're born with your passions. So rather than lament which passions you don't have, celebrate the ones that you do and develop mastery over them. And by that, I mean, understand the strengths that you can enjoy based on those passions and really lean into opportunities that allow you to demonstrate those strengths, and appreciate the vulnerabilities that you might struggle with, and understand which situations can provoke those vulnerabilities so that you can better navigate them when you're confronted with them. That's mastery at the end of the day over them.
Mastery is it. We're coming to the close, but I'm going to ask all of our guests, tell me an example of grace in your life.
There are many. Every single day that I get to do the work I do is a moment of grace for me, because I have the opportunity to share what I know and watch others experience it and grow from it. They transform before my eyes. And at the same time, I'm learning from their experiences. But there is a recent one I want to share with you, John. I spent some time with a team recently. The leader was actually wrestling with this issue of racism specifically, and said, I'd like to do something with my team. I don't know what to do. We ended up deciding we would have a listening session with the entire team. And that was all done on a Zoom call. It was challenging. But I found that that particular leader demonstrated true grace in that she had the courage to open up the floor for a very, very difficult conversation. She created, through the mechanism that we used, a safe space for people to share. There was tremendous pain on the team. People felt comfortable describing that to one another. And then I watched the entire team hold each other up through their discussion, whether it was an African American person talking about being concerned about her child being pulled over in a car, or a woman whose husband was a police officer being concerned about him having to go out in riot gear. They each were able to hold each other. That was grace in action, in my opinion.
Oh, what a wonderful story, and what a great way to end. Except I want you to let people know how they can get in contact with you. How can we find you?
Well, you can go to my website, which is thepurposelink.com, and you can reach me at alove@thepurposelink.com.
Great, thank you. And you are a prolific writer. You write often for Smart Brief. So
I do.
Your stuff is all over the internet, and so that's it. So, Alaina, you have been such a terrific guest, and thank you for being my very first guest.
Thank you for the invitation.
Remember you. We remember our first. So I'm going to close out here, and there we go.